Before we get started today, I would like anyone who is listening to think about something good that happened in the last week. What is something that brought you joy, something that inspired you, something you felt proud of, no matter how small or how big it might be? I encourage you to take just a second and think about that, and then jot it down if you can. I live in Southern California, where we're used to lots of warm and sunny days. Last week, we got more rain than we've had in the last year. It rained day after day after day. The first few days I was okay, but towards the end, I really had to search for the good in each day. Our daughter is almost 3 years old, and she just discovered puddles. So towards the end of a very trying week, we put on our rain boots and our raincoats, and we went in search of puddles. The bigger, the better. This brought me the joy that I was searching for in an otherwise dismal day. It is so important that we are looking for these small bits of happiness right now. The world feels heavy and full of sorrow, with families huddled up in houses together, balancing work and homeschooling and tantrums and losses of jobs. It's so easy to see the negatives, as they are literally swirling all around us. But are you able to see the beauty, the good, and the joyful times as well? Sometimes the search is harder than others, but it is worth the time it takes until you find them. When we learn how to become resilient, we learn how to embrace the beautifully broad spectrum of the human experience. In 2016, I learned the meaning of what it meant to be resilient. This picture was taken on January 24th, the day before I went into labor with our first baby. My parents had driven from Park City, Utah to be with us to welcome our baby into the world. This picture signifies the hope and the excitement we were feeling for the day. We had no idea what was to come. At around 6 months into our pregnancy, we decided to switch from a doctor that we loved to having our baby in a birthing center close to our home. I've never been one for hospitals, and it felt better knowing we would be in a place that I was comfortable and felt supported. We took a hypnobirthing class, so we would be as prepared as any woman can be once labor starts. I had heard story after story of first-time moms going into labor for 12, 24, 36, sometimes 48 hours. We thought we were going to have plenty of time for everything. That was not the case. My labor started around 1:30 p.m. We were at the birthing center by 3. In California, you can only legally be in a birthing center for 24 hours. When my midwife checked my cervix, I was at a 4. She told me to either go home or maybe walk around for a little bit. I literally thought she was crazy. I wasn't going anywhere. She left my husband and I alone in the room to begin setting up. She came back 10 minutes later and checked again. I was at a 7. She looked at me in surprise and said, "It looks like we're having a baby today." All I wanted to do was to get into the water. This is one of my most favorite pictures of all time. To me, this picture shows the power of women. If you notice, almost every one of these women are touching me, supporting me, holding space for me and my journey into motherhood. Labor is such a powerful expression of what it means to be a woman. There's such determination and fortitude in our bodies and in our minds. I was focused on breathing this baby down, just like I had learned in my classes. My midwife was checking the baby's heartbeat every 8 minutes. 1 minute, everything was fine, and the next, the energy in the room shifted. My midwife's face fell. She told me very sternly to get out of the tub. It was a big ask to get my huge, laboring body out of that tub, but I followed her command. They laid me on the bed, gave me oxygen, and I heard her say the words, "Call an ambulance." I was totally calm. We had talked about a possible transfer to the hospital, In midwifery care, that is always a possibility. I knew the hospital was close, and I trusted that we were going to be taken care of. The ambulance ride over was a complete blur, but I remained calm. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, which I believe came from God. I was rushed into the hospital, into a sterile room, everything I was trying to avoid. I was still calm until I heard the doctor utter the words, "We've lost the baby's heart tones." I remember thinking to myself, well, you're the doctor. Isn't it your job to find them? She said it again, "We've lost your baby's heart tones." I literally had no idea what she was talking about. She had to spell it out when I asked her what it meant. She said, "It means we've lost your baby." The grief that came over me was unbearable. I could barely breathe through my sobbing, laboring body. I scanned the room at all the people gathered around me as the realization of what was ahead of me set in. I said, "Give me a C-section." My midwife told me that we could, but that I would need to recover from major surgery on top of everything else. I knew I didn't want that. "Give me an epidural," I shouted. I was told that I could have one, but that it would slow labor down. This had already been going on long enough, and I knew I didn't want it to last a second longer than it needed to. I was in this alone, in a room full of people. It was just me, an already bereaved mother who had to do the unthinkable task of pushing her baby out, a baby she would never hear cry or take its first breath. So, like any good mother, I began pushing. I pushed for 3.5 hours. There was a clock on the wall, and I remember watching it go around 3 times. It was as close as anyone could ever get to hell. The people surrounding me, including my husband, were so helpless. I knew they all wanted to take my pain away, but none of them could. It was all up to me. I held close to the thought that one of those pushes would get the baby out. I was right. At around 8:30 p.m., they placed our son, Jack Martin Brooks' lifeless body on my chest. I willed him to take a breath. How could this be? How did this happen? How in the world was I going to survive this? We had a photographer in the room with us. She and my husband had decided that they would document this, and if I never wanted to see the pictures or watch the video, I wouldn't have to, but at least I would have the option. I watched his video on Jack's birthday every year. I'm grateful to have it. This picture was taken, and I honestly have no idea why I have a smile on my face. I'm curious if it was a moment that I shared with Jack, where he filled me with a moment's worth of joy and a welcoming to motherhood. It is one of the few pictures we have, and as strange as it is, I cherish it as it is his whole story wrapped up in an 8-minute video and a few pictures. As we left the hospital and went home without our baby, the grief that we felt was more intense than anything I have ever or probably will ever feel. My parents were at our house, and they were besides themselves as well. Not only were they grieving the loss of their first grandchild, but also for their daughter. As a parent, there can be no greater pain than the agony of your child. There are no words that can console someone after a tragedy such as this. There is nothing that makes sense or makes one feel better. There is an old wives' tale in the South that if a woman eats eggplant parmesan, she will go into labor within 48 hours. There's even a restaurant that will give a free meal if they don't. I joke that my mom only needed to start preparing eggplant parmesan to induce my labor. A few hours after we got home, she said, "We have all this food, Lori. What would you like to do?" Without any hesitation, I said, "Call our friends. We need them, and they're going to need us." Some of them didn't even know we had lost Jack yet. We sent text messages and made phone calls, and within a few hours, our front door started opening. Each time it did, our house was filled with so much love and grief and sadness and pain. Our friends brought with them all the raw emotions a human can feel. With each embrace, I leaned into them, sharing my pain in a way that I didn't know was possible. We cried and we laughed. We ate and we drank wine. We hugged and we were silent. We just were. We didn't do anything. We just were. But we were in it together. We clasped hands that day, and I knew that the only way we were going to survive this was together. You either get bitter or you get better. It's that simple. You either take what has been dealt to you and allow it to make you a better person, or you allow it to tear you down. The choice does not belong to fate. It belongs to you. I found this quote very early on after Jack died. There was something in me that knew to the core of my soul that this was the key. You either get bitter or you get better. It's that simple. You either take what has been dealt to you and allow it to make you a better person, or you allow it to tear you down. The choice does not belong to fate. It belongs to you, circled around in my mind over and over. I do not want to get bitter. I remember thinking, I want to get better. I want to be better. How can I be better? It was going to be a tough and long road, but I knew I needed to make that choice. And as it was exactly that, a choice. We could have gotten bitter and no one would have faulted us for it. We could have pushed everyone away and lived in our sadness alone, but we chose the alternative. We chose to let people in as close as we could by sharing our story. Our group was very deliberate as it was handpicked by us. We let people into the center of our grief, and because of that, we were able to share it. Anytime we shared, I felt like we were giving little bits of grief away, and it lessened the amount we had to bear. It was the most beautiful and brutal time of our lives. Author Glennon Doyle coined the term brutiful, and that's how it felt. Absolutely brutiful. We were surrounded by so much love and support, but my husband and I were also alone in this grief. We clung to each other, literally and figuratively. There were huge waves that would wash over us, and the tears would start again. I looked up the definition of grief, and it said that it's your body's reaction to any painful, severe emotional trauma in life. It is an overwhelming sadness with feelings of despair, and it's the heart's longing for something loved and lost. Are you feeling any of these emotions right now? Is anyone out there having a reaction to a severe emotional trauma in their life? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced this model back in 1969 with her book on death and dying. These were written as a way of how people cope with sadness and illness and dying, not as a reflection of how people grieve. Later, she expanded her model to include any form of personal loss, such as the death of a loved one, the loss of a job or income, major rejection, the end of a relationship or divorce, drug addiction, infertility diagnoses, or even minor losses. I bring all of this up because I believe we are all in a great state of grieving with what is happening in the world right now. We are probably all in different stages during this pandemic, but to some degree, we are all experiencing the loss of life we had. We are met with such uncertainty, instability, incredible financial pain, and worldwide suffering. We have been told to stay home, away from our friends and family, the very thing that makes life wonderful. There was recently a 6th stage of grief written by author David Kessler, who was Elizabeth's protege and co-author on a previous book. It is entitled Finding Meaning. David Kessler says in his book, those people who are able to find meaning tend to have a much easier time grieving than those who don't. They're less likely to remain stuck in one of the 5 stages. Grief is extremely powerful. It's easy to get stuck in your pain and remain bitter, angry, or depressed. Grief grabs your heart and doesn't seem to let go. He goes on to say, but if you can manage to find meaning in even the most senseless loss, you can do more than get unstuck. When circumstances are at their lowest, you can find your best. You can keep growing and finding ways to live a good and someday an even joyous life. One enriched by the lessons and love of the person you lost. When we lost Jack, I knew that I was going to need to search for meaning. Not a meaning for why he died. I would never know that. It was an accident, a fluke, an umbilical cord accident that nobody could see coming. But rather, I would need to search for how to make it mean something. Jack's story, his gift, needed to live on. I had no idea what it would look like or when I would know, but I knew it would come. When we were first asked to shelter in place in California, I, like many of you, were in shock. It didn't make any sense to me. Wasn't this just like the flu? Why are we being asked to do this? All of these questions some of us are still asking. As the days went on and the schools closed, restaurants shut their doors, Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, shut down their rides, it all became very real. In addition to working as a life coach, I also work for Franklin Covey's education department in sales. Everything came to a screeching halt. Like you, I worried about my job, the safety of my family, our economy. But as I woke up each morning, there was also a sense of peace that came over me. I started to notice it. I kept getting flashbacks to when Jack died. I kept drawing parallels. The same sort of things started happening like they did after his death. Our circle got smaller and more deliberate because we were asked to social distance. We began talking about life and death and the things that really matter with our friends because really, what else was there to talk about? We connected with our family and friends in a deeper and more meaningful way than we had before. Things got quiet again. It was so reminiscent of what I realized is that I've been in training for this. I have already been quarantined. I was able to see my friends and family during Jack's death, but everything else felt the same. There was a sacredness around what was happening. People began looking out for each other, checking in on their neighbors. Free online everything started cropping up. People's hearts softened and they started asking, what can I do to help? I continually see people putting out fruit from their trees for their neighbors to take for free. I often see posts on social media from people who are just offering to help people in need. I have been given banana bread and Easter baskets by our neighbors just because. There was a time after Jack died that I wished people could have a glimpse into what we were feeling. I didn't want them to go through the pain and the grief, but I wanted them to experience the wonder that we did. Everything was more intense. The colors of the ocean appeared brighter, the birds chirped louder, the love I felt was deeper, the connections to others more intense. There were so many incredibly beautiful moments during that time, and when I look back and I remember why they were occurring and think about Jack dying, it almost doesn't seem real. I believe that it is through that grief that we are able to take pause and feel a deeper sense of the meaning of life. I wonder if that's what's happening right now. Have we been asked to pause so we can get in touch with what really matters most? Are you feeling that way? Are you having thoughts about who you are as a person? David Kessler says that grief may cause you to deepen your connection to those who are still with you, or to invite back into your life people from whom you've been estranged. Or it may give you a heightened sense of the beauty of the life we are all so privileged to have as long as we remain on this earth. Have you felt any of these things in the last month? I don't know about you, but I've done more Zoom calls with family and friends that I rarely talk to. There is something about tragedy that brings people together. Social distancing doesn't mean social disconnecting. I'm finding it to be quite the opposite. Can we have the beauty without the grief? I'm just not so sure that we can. The fact that our families are together right now, some for the first time in a very long time, is something to cherish. There is goodness everywhere and in every situation. We just have to look for it. We are living in a very difficult time in our history, one that will never be forgotten. There is a sense of immense grief, but naming it as such gives us a way to get through it. We can start to see the phases of grief as we pass through them, and hopefully in the end, get to the sixth stage in order to find meaning. Whatever that meaning is to each one of us, there is no way to get out of this pandemic without being changed. Will it make you bitter, or will it make you better? The night Jack died and we held him in our arms, Heath told me that he wanted to try to have another baby. I couldn't even think about it at that moment, but he felt the need to let me know that his desire to become a dad had intensified after losing our son. We were not able to get pregnant with Jack on our own and had to do an IUI. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a step before IVF. It's a very uninvasive procedure that just helps the process along. We got pregnant with Jack on round 2. I knew we were going to need to make the decision to get pregnant again if we were going to have another baby. I'm usually a fast-moving person. I don't belabor decisions and usually jump in pretty quick, but getting pregnant the second time took a while for me. I'm an older mom, so I knew we couldn't wait too long. So shortly after what would have been Jack's 9-month birthday, I found myself back at our doctor's office for another round. To say it was nerve-wracking was an understatement. We had been going to grief counseling, and I felt like I had grieved enough to handle another pregnancy should we be granted one. We got pregnant on the first try. So this was me for the next 9 months. A whole new wave of reckoning came over me. I spent every day of my pregnancy focused on staying in the present moment. I stayed close to the center line. I would not let myself get too excited or too nervous. I sat right in the middle. People told me over and over again, "Lori, lightning doesn't strike twice. You won't lose this baby." I was never convinced, as I knew several women who had lost more than one. I could not let myself go into the what ifs in either direction. What did I know? I knew that this was a different baby who deserved as carefree of an experience as Jack did. I knew I owed it to her. Jack's gender was a surprise, but we did find out with Emma. That came as a recommendation from our doctor. He suggested we find out the gender in order to bond with the baby earlier. We heeded his advice and were cautiously optimistic. I knew it would be a girl, as the space for Jack could only be filled with him at that time. I knew that this baby would either live or she would die, and I would not know until one of those things happened. I knew I could not look into the future. Anytime I did, anxiety would rise up in me, and I was determined to shield our little girl from any unnecessary stress. It was so hard at times. Was I nervous? Of course I was. Did I worry about how we would survive if we lost another baby? Yep. But I focused on controlling my mind. I kept it in the here and now and told it what to think. I believe that is the greatest piece of advice for what we are currently experiencing with this pandemic. I noticed the same things. When I let my mind drift to the what if I lose my job, or what if someone in my family gets sick, that's when the anxiety rises in me. But when I stay in the present moment, I'm okay. My mind stays clear and open and receptive. Early on in my pregnancy, I was at a church retreat. I had just finished a Bible study with some women, and this was the culmination. I hadn't told anyone I was pregnant because it was before the 12-week mark. It was a beautiful day. At one of the breaks, I went to the bathroom. I noticed immediately that I was spotting. I went to worst case scenario. All the fear I had kept at bay came flooding in. I called my doctor immediately, and he told me that 25% of women spot early on in their pregnancy. I had an appointment with him the following Wednesday. It was only Saturday. He told me I could go to the emergency room or I could wait. He left it up to me. Here's the thought I remember explicitly thinking. If I've lost this baby, I'm not ready to start the grieving process yet. I will wait until Wednesday to see our doctor. And then I put it out of my mind. I literally did not think about what could happen 4 days from then. I calmed my mind, stayed in the present moment, and went about my life. To say I was relieved when we heard the heartbeat at our next appointment was an understatement. But I learned through that experience that mindset matters. I could have spent those next 4 days worrying, and the outcome would have been the same. I could have spent the entire 9 months worrying, and the result would have been the same. Worrying does nothing for us. In my case, it could have done harm to my unborn child, and there was no way I was going to impose my fear onto her brand new little innocent being. So I spent the next 9 months managing my mind. How did I do it? People always ask. The net of it is this. There are circumstances. My circumstance was that Jack died. There was nothing I could do to change that. But what I could control and what I could change were the thoughts around it. I could think positive and hopeful thoughts, or I could consume my mind with worry, anxiety, and fear. Like that earlier quote says, the choice is ours to make. It doesn't always feel like that, and I'm certainly not going to say it was easy. It was probably one of the most difficult times in my entire life. I had to work on it every single day, throughout the day. Although I felt joyous because I was pregnant, I now knew that there were outcomes that did not include a baby. I had to get through the entire pregnancy to let the breath I was holding out. I bring this up because we are being asked to do that right now. There's so much fear in the world, fear of all sorts of things that are happening and could happen in the future. What are the thoughts you're letting into your mind? Is it a thought? It is the thought that creates a feeling. So how are you feeling lately? If you're feeling hopeful, chances are the thoughts you're entertaining are full of hope and inspiration. If you're feeling scared, worried, or anxious, I invite you to look at the thoughts that are consuming your minds. We have to be so careful and pay such close attention to what we are letting in because they shape everything in our lives. Whatever we focus on is what we get more of. The pandemic right now is our circumstance. We cannot change it, but we can control our thoughts around it. When I was pregnant with Emma, I read so many inspiring books. I wrote Post-it notes of affirmations all around my house. I sought out grief counseling, intuitive readings, connected with friends whenever I could. We spent a lot of our days down by the water because that calmed my soul. I focused solely on keeping my mind free of negative thoughts and emotions. That became my full-time job. That is exactly what I'm finding that I'm doing to cope with COVID-19. I'm listening to lots of great podcasts, Brene Brown being one of them. I'm reading uplifting stories and limiting the news. I'm getting on Zoom calls with the friends that I love and want to stay connected to. I'm taking lots of walks with my dogs and my family, moving my body, eating healthy, journaling, meditating, and anything else that will keep my mind centered in the here and now. I'm finding anything that I can to keep my mind in a positive space. I do acknowledge that I am one of the lucky ones. I have not lost my job yet, and I am not sick, but I will not spend any of the time that I have worrying about either of those things. Instead, I am asking, how can I help? What do I have that can be of service? One day, a couple of weeks ago, I had a really bad day. I was feeling down and sad, and I had a Zoom call scheduled with some of my best friends. I almost canceled the call. I just didn't feel like I had anything to add and didn't want to be a downer on the call. But I decided to join anyway. Instead of bringing them all down, I found the opposite happened. They all brought me up. That is how life goes. We have to be brave enough to show up even when we don't feel like it. My friends filled me with so much love and so much laughter that by the time I got off the call, my entire mood had shifted. I was so grateful I decided to show up. Someone posted this on Facebook on March 20th, the day after our shelter-in-place order had been made in California. I printed it and put it prominently on my fridge. These questions I can focus on, I thought to myself. So every day I go through my checklist. Some days are easier than others. Just because I haven't lost my job and I'm not sick does not mean that I'm not grieving. I'm grieving the loss of the life I used to live, and that is a process for each and every one of us. But I can check in with this list to make sure I am doing what I can and focusing on what is in my circle of control. So much of what we worry about is outside of our control. We can't fix it or change it, and worrying about it won't do us any good. What can you control? These 6 ideas help me when I'm feeling out of control. This is how I feel every day, like I'm climbing up and over through all these emotions that are associated with grief. Some days I'm up and some days I'm down, but overall, I'm focused and I am in control of what I let my mind think, because I know that that's what will make or break my days. There are some days where I just need to sit with the grief, just like I did in the months following Jack's grief. There are tears and sadness, but there is nowhere to go but through. So I sit with the sadness and I really feel the grief. We cannot hurry grief. There's no timeline for when we will recover from it. It comes in waves and we aren't always ready for the waves. But I know that it is in feeling the pain that will ultimately lead to the final stage of grief, which is finding meaning. How do we find meaning in an otherwise seemingly meaningless experience? It might come in grandiose ways. It also might come in very small ways. But I believe that we can each find our own sense of meaning. I heard a speaker talk about how we are moving from the very left brain driven world, full of people doing lots of things all of the time. The left brain is known for logic, sequencing, linear thinking, mathematics, facts, and thinking in words. The right brain is more visual and intuitive. It is known for imagination, holistic thinking, the arts, creativity, intuition, emotions, and daydreaming. The speaker that I listened to explained that we are moving from a very external or left brain world into a more internal right brain one. We have been stripped of all distractions. Even if you find yourself in a house full of people, your children, your husband, the distractions are gone. We're not spending time driving to and from places. There are no lessons to be taken, and gatherings have come to a minimum. When Jack died, that's how I felt. All the external stuff was taken away, and I was only left with my intuition, holistic thinking, and a different kind of rhythm. I am a doer. I love tasks and to-do lists. Sometimes I write a to-do that I've already done just so I can cross it off. However, in the months and even the year following Jack's death, I realized that so many of the things I invited into my life prior didn't mean anything. I learned how to be. I actually got so good at it that I've had to retrain myself in the doing area a bit. After childbirth, you can't do anything but heal. So that's what I did. I healed and focused on my mindset and stayed present and in the moment. Isn't that what we're being asked to do right now? Enjoy the small things in life, our families, walks, games, puzzles, cooking. Our kids are learning how to navigate boredom, which in my humble opinion is one of the best skills a kid can learn. We have gone back to a simpler life. We can fight against it, or we can lean into it and listen for the lessons we are meant to hear. How do we make meaning out of all of this? Who do we want to be when we can finally emerge into the world? What will the days of quarantine have taught us? Will you be better or will you be bitter? Will you be stronger and more energized or weaker and tired? The choice is up to us. There is a saying in Tibetan, tragedies should be utilized as a source of strength, no matter what sort of difficulties, how painful the experience is. If we lose our hope, that is our real disaster. How are you holding on to hope? Are you spreading hope or negativity? Do you believe that we can come out of this better people? I'm not fearful of catching the virus, but what I am concerned about is people letting this virus into their minds. So what practices do you have in place to keep yourself safe from that? How are you taking care of yourself? Working for Franklin Covey has been one of the greatest gifts of my life, especially now. For those of you who are not familiar with the habits, the late Dr. Stephen Covey developed them after years of extensive research around what makes an effective person. When he was asked if the habits are as relevant today as when he first wrote them, he replied, "The greater the change, the more difficult the challenges, the more relevant the habits become." I would say our world is enduring some pretty big changes and even greater challenges. The seventh habit is sharpen the saw and is one of my favorites. As women, many of us have been led to belief that self-care is selfish, that we must put everyone else first in life. To that, I'm curious about the speech they give at the beginning of every flight we take, that in case of an emergency, put your own mask on first. If we don't take care of ourselves, how can we possibly take care of others? So how are you balancing your body, mind, heart, and soul? Can you get up 5 to 10 minutes earlier so you can start your day before your family descends on the peace and quiet? Can you get outside for a 10-minute walk to clear your mind? Do you have positive podcasts that you might listen to when you are folding laundry or while your kids are watching TV? Are you reaching out to the people that you love and asking them truly how they're coping with all of this? After Jack died, I met with my midwife a lot. It was protocol to make sure that I wasn't showing signs of deep and dangerous depression. I remember one day where I was particularly low. She said something I will never forget. She said, "When you are feeling at your lowest, think of something you can do for someone else. It will help." She was right. When I focused on giving of my heart, it helped to heal it. I listened to author Glennon Doyle speak about a time when her sister was having a really difficult time after her divorce. She had moved in with Glennon and her family. Every night after dinner, her sister would go downstairs to her room and shut the door. Glennon would follow her down and sit by the closed door with a cup of tea. She talks about how important it was to just hold vigil for her sister, who never even knew she was on the other side of the door. That is what we need to do for each other right now. For some of us, this is the biggest tragedy we've ever lived through. How can we hold vigil for others? We're so lucky to live in a time where we can still connect. Let those connections deepen with your tribe. Let yourself really feel the feelings you're experiencing and talk about those feelings. Reach out for help when you need it, and help others when you feel strong. This is going to continue to ebb and flow for who knows how long. As a life coach, I spend a lot of my time coaching others, but the hour per week I spend having someone help me coach on my thoughts is the most valuable time of the entire week sometimes. We can't go through life alone. It is in the sharing that helps us heal the pain. With the remainder of the time we have left, I urge you to stay in the present moment. Don't let yourself get too far ahead in the future. We have no idea what is to come, but we will know when we get there. I invite you to connect with your people. As women, we are extremely strong and united. Who do you need to reach out to? And last, be open to the meaning that you might find at the end of this. Some of you might have a plan. Some of you might have no idea. Some of you might be hearing this idea for the very first time ever. But I believe it is there, the meaning, and it will come if you're open to it. So here my mom and I are again, nearly a year and a half after Jack's death, on the day I went to the hospital. Through those smiles are a whole host of emotions. We didn't talk much that day. We kept ourselves busy. There was nervous, yet a calm energy around us. We were optimistically hopeful, and that is where we stayed. This picture signifies all that is good and right in the world. Emma came out big and pink with a scream that was heard around the world. She was born a week before her due date, a healthy 8.5-pound screaming baby girl. I feel like there was a collective sigh of relief that day in late June. The only words in the video our same photographer captured in Emma's 8-minute video is me saying, "We did it." This picture signifies strength and courage. My love for Jack is just as strong as it is for Emma. He came into our lives to teach us completely different lessons, but they are very strong ones. He taught me the meaning of the word resilient. He taught us how to feel deep, deep emotions. He taught us to cry and to laugh and to bring people together. As much as I wish Jack was here with us, and I don't know why he isn't, nor will I probably ever know, but the meaning I have found is in sharing his story with people like you. If it helps just one person, his death has meaning. As we continue down this path together, focus on the things you can control. Spend time sharpening your saw every day. Be kind to yourself and to others, and be mindful about what thoughts you are choosing. Above all, our mindset matters. We are all in this together, the collective grief that surrounds us. In conclusion, I must close with this story of Emma. A baby born after a loss is called a rainbow baby. She is our light and has helped us heal our hearts in a way that I thank God for every day. She was brought into our life to remind us that happiness is our birthright. Through the pain and suffering of the human experience, we are able to find the good. We will get through this, and what comes of it, I believe, will be the greatest gift we have ever witnessed. Before I end today, I would love for you to really think about and perhaps jot down next to the thought that made you happy from the beginning of this story. What item can you commit to in the week ahead that can help you sharpen your saw? What can you do that is supportive of your body, your mind, your heart, and your soul? Focusing on what brings us joy and spending time sharpening our saw every day are two suggestions that will help you navigate any circumstance you might come up against. Grief is in two parts. The first is loss. The second is the remaking of life. How will you begin to remake your life? Thank you so much for allowing me to share our story. I wish you love and peace on your own journey through grief to find its meaning.